Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Rausan Pereira. India has electrified all its villages 12 days ahead of a deadline set by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the government said on Sunday, which could give the ruling party a boost ahead of the 2019 general elections. Prime Minister Modi said on Sunday that April 28th, on the evening of which a remote village in the northeast became the last to be connected to the grid, would be remembered as a historic day in the development journey of India. Government data showed that all of India's 6 lakh census villages have now been electrified. On Saturday, Laesang village in the Senapati district of Manipur became the last Indian village to be brought on the national power grid. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how we went about achieving this feat and what does it mean for the India growth story. Joining me on the program today are Anil Razdan, former Secretary, Ministry of Power; Arun Kumar Verma, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Power; Subhomoy Bhattacharya, Consulting Editor of the Business Standard. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Verma, I'd like to begin with you. First, of course, congratulations. And it's a big achievement. It's not a small feat. How did we go about achieving this feat?
Yeah, let me congratulate one and all and the citizen of our country. First thing is that village electrification we were doing, but 2012-13 and 13-14, if you see the total effort that we did, I mean the number of villages were very less that we could electrify, probably because these all villages were left which were very difficult and situated in remote areas, on hillocks, in the forest, and all in snowbound areas and all those things. But nonetheless, the Honorable Prime Minister on 15th of August 2015 made a call that all the remaining villages have to be electrified by 1000 days. And then the target was fixed. Now you have to work backward. How to do, what are the problems? Material is a problem, manpower is a problem, skilled manpower is a great problem.
Indeed, we'll get to the problems in just a bit. But the achievement itself is, how did you go about it?
Yeah, the targets were there, state-wise targets were there. We had been reviewing it every month with the state governments. The secretaries of state governments we call every month, we invite here. We had been putting the REC is the nodal agency. REC has an office in most of the states. So they have a chief project manager. We appointed some of the GVMs, we call Gramin Vidyut Abhiyanta, who went to the field and they found out what are the issues connected there. We requested the state, and some of the states have done very proactively also. They started having a joint meeting of their employee as well as the contractors, and the contractual issues or sometimes say right of way issue is there, sometimes even the problem between the two villages are there, and all such small things they used to solve themselves. So it was a very proactive and collaborative approach of the state governments, discoms. Obviously, our job was to monitor, our job was to be in support of them, provide money most of the time, hand-holding some of the states and discoms, and that we have done, and things have happened.
Okay. Mr. Razdan, let's put the story into perspective now. The credit must go to the government for having ticked off this box as well. And let's not forget, several governments in the past for 70 years, 7 decades, have been trying to electrify India completely, but have not been able to do so. This government has finally achieved it.
Certainly. I would think that, you see, our first real conscious effort to get to know this problem was, I think, when Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister of the country. And I remember that on the advice of some of senior advisors that time, an announcement was made that all of India's villages would be electrified. Well, I think without realizing the magnitude of the problem, as Mr. Verma has said, it is an extremely difficult task. It's not an easy task. First of all, electricity, you see, is a concurrent subject. It's a subject between the center and the states. For quite a few decades, we were struggling with meeting basic demand of electricity, even in our very major towns, what to talk of villages. But in fact, getting down to the late 90s, it was realized that the Rural Electrification Corporation had virtually stopped lending for rural electrification because rural electrification had become a losing business. And the state electricity boards, I think, had also fallen prey to that because of politicization of electricity, and it was not a profitable venture, so to say. But I think the social commitment and the social obligation, I would say, was understood. And then later on, I think in the UPA government began to be realized that yes, there is a huge task to be done. And about 125,000 villages were identified to be electrified. And I would say that particularly one state in the east, which was very poorly electrified, was run by a leftist government. And they realized that the villages were not electrified. And, the villages were looking for inclusion, I would say economic inclusion. And electrification is, I think, a tremendous tool for economic inclusion of people besides raising poverty levels. In fact, the first major dip in poverty in the country also coincided with the first phase of rural electrification. And as Mr. Verma has rightly pointed out, there are some extremely difficult villages which were under extremism, some in very remote areas. And it is not always possible for, say, within the rules or the norms, I would say, to get the right rates even to electrify those places, because you lay down some lines there, you leave material there, and because of the law and order conditions, I remember in Jharkhand particularly, they used to get lifted.
Right.
So the contractors were in a problem also.
Sure.
And I think recently the government has covered itself with glory by finishing the hardest miles, I would say, and even used helicopters to drop supplies. I think it's extremely creditable.
Sure.
But going forward, I think we'll have to see the economic viability of this program.
Indeed, we do have to see what the challenges are going forward. We'll get to that in just a bit. But before that, let me ask Subhomoy a question. Subhomoy, let's talk about the per capita consumption of power, and can that be used as an indicator to gauge living standards? And how does consumption of electricity improve living standards on the whole?
Yeah, Frank, that's an interesting point. In fact, last year, WhatsApp is not a very reliable sort of a, indicator, but there was a meme going around in WhatsApp, which was about the level of light coming from different parts of the world as revealed by the satellite pictures. And the interesting thing that had happened in India is, if you look at the picture from say 2000, around by the time when Mr. Razdan is referring to, till about say now, you would see large parts of India had actually got lit up. Now, how does that reflect? That's exactly the point which again he was referring to, that this is also the period when India has gone through probably the fastest phase of poverty reduction. So what I look at electricity coming to villages is that it's not a statistic. It is actually a multiplier. Electricity reaching a point it's first of all, it is not a one-day event, in the sense that this electricity reaching a place across India is a phase that will keep on getting denser and denser as the connections. The hardest part Mr. Verma's team has done, which is getting the line through. Now is the part about the qualitative thing, about how to make the electricity work. Because first of all, now what will happen is you get immediately demand for more number of hours of electricity. Why shouldn't every village lane be electrified? Why shouldn't every house be electrified? And these are not, as I would say, socialist questions. These are very capitalist consumption questions. Immediately as electricity comes along, it creates a consumption multiplier. It acts as an investment multiplier. It works as an education multiplier. It works as a health multiplier, because it underpins practically everything that a modern society does. The fact that we were not there with electricity meant that lots of people with lots of abilities and talent were simply not able to get onto the, you might say, the national development grid. So it is So you know what's happened is that it's as I said, it's not just happened and on one day and then you get on with some other target. This is something like GST. Like it will happen over time. It gets denser and the ramifications become much more acute as the days goes on. And that's the beauty of this sort of programs.
Right.
That the multiplier effect across every sector is intensely high.
Sure. So there's a multiplier effect is what you're suggesting. You know, Mr. Verma, if you look at per capita consumption of electricity in India and you compare it to the developed world, it's significantly low. It's very, very low. It's about 1,200 kilowatt hour, I think, in India at the moment. But if you look at the US, it is over 13,000. If you look at the #1 country in the world, which is Iceland, it's at over 31,000 kilowatt hour. So how do we increase that? And does electrification help in increasing it?
Yeah, certainly. Let me qualify and put some caveats when I make this answer. First thing is that per capita consumption as the indicator of the development or your level of say consumption will vary from country to country, state to state, depending upon say the culture of that place, depending upon the geography of that place, the climate of that place. So even if we increase our consumption, it is not going to be as high as the Iceland figure you were telling, 31,000 units per capita. But our consumption as on today is quite low. It's 1,200 and certainly it needs to increase. And as our economic activity will increase, it has to go up. There is no doubt about it. It has a multiplier effect. And not only the economic activity, but your quality of life, the social activity, they all increase with the availability of the power and electricity. The crust of the entire issue is that it's not even in our country. Say per capita consumption in Delhi and Mumbai is much higher than the per capita consumption in a rural area in our country. And therefore, this kind of activity which has taken the electricity to the last village, you can say, or the interior village and the difficult villages of our country, their quality of life is going to increase, the per capita consumption is going to increase. And rightly pointed out by Sujoy that it's not just the connectivity. We appreciate that the access does not mean connectivity alone. It also means availability of the power around the clock. And therefore, village electrification is the first part. Our next and immediate target is the household electrification, and Pradhan Mantri Sahaj Har Ghar Bijli Yojana, this Saubhagya is a step in that direction, which has already been taken. And the third one is very concomitant to that is the 24/7 power for all. Because unless that is there, you cannot reap the fruit of the electrification. Because we have found that in villages, people are not willing to take electricity connection. Reason being that once they take the connection, they have to pay a smaller bill and a bigger bill, whatever we bill, and they have to buy the kerosene also. So a kind of double jeopardy kind of situation is there. So they have to pay both ways. Therefore, connectivity alone is not sufficient. Round the clock supply or assured supply in the need hours, like in the morning, in the evening. Therefore, our immediate step would be household electrification and ensuring the supply.
Sure. Okay.
So in that circumstances, obviously our per capita consumption is going to higher. The another point I would like to bring to the say discussion. We were a electricity scarce country not long back. Today we say that we have adequate sufficient electricity, but it was not long back that we were not having sufficient electricity. And most of the time the rural area used to be the sufferer. If you do not have adequate power, you will just go for the say shutdown or load shedding in the rural areas. Honorable Prime Minister in the initial days itself, when he was reviewing the infrastructure development and all, made this point that the Ministry of Power must care for allocating more power to the rural area, particularly those states and those areas which have low per capita consumption, because that will increase their consumption. Otherwise, the older formula in our country, Mr. Razdan must be knowing it, has been that those who use more power used to get more power. So this kind of even distribution also has been taken care of.
Sure.
So I'm sure the per capita consumption is going to be up.
Okay. You know, Mr. Razdan, How are villages and rural India going to be transformed as a result of electrification? What kind of an effect is it going to have in rural India?
See, I would say that the journey, the first stage has just begun. These are all, I presume, subject to correction by Mr. Verma, these are all the census villages. There are habitations which have, dhanis and, hamlets, we call them in English, maybe 50, 100, 200 households, which are not yet electrified. Now, they are some distance away from the main village. And we will have to take electricity to those remote areas also. And I think the MNRE is working out programs to take it to those remote areas also. Because then only we can say that everybody has got electricity.
At the end of the day, 3.5 crore families still do not have electricity.
They do not have. And I think there are major states which are without, I think 44% to 50% households without electricity. And I think the states are probably UP, Odisha, and maybe Jharkhand. And these, you see, these states are there. So these will need a lot of concentrated treatment. But the responsibility is essentially of the state governments now. Because the government of India can do till a certain point. Beyond that, it's the states who've got to pick up that thing. And I think the second phase will be to take electricity to all those hamlets which are within those revenue estates, which are census villages within inverted commas, then to the households. But I think metering along with connections has to be a prerequisite. Otherwise, it will again be a bleed on the distribution companies. And for the village and particularly the lower income group households, I would say that prepaid metering should be absolutely compulsory, which is also envisaged now, because I've been saying that ever since the Saubhagya scheme was announced, that in my view, prepaid metering is a must.
Okay.
Because it has to be a viable economic activity.
Okay, it has
Otherwise, we'll move from one distribution reform program to another, to another, to another. Okay. And if the loans are going to be inherited by the state governments, other programs are bound to suffer.
Okay, point taken. It has to be an economically viable activity. Otherwise, the distribution companies are going to bleed, is what Mr. Razdan is suggesting. A quick response from Mr. Verma, and then I'll go to Subhomoy.
Two quick points that I would like to make. First thing is that once village, then habitation, and then household. I mean, this journey is not this way it is not designed. This used to be understood by most of the people earlier. Once you are in the village and go to the house, obviously you have to cross these hamlets and the habitations. So therefore, there is no question of going to the habitation. You are straightway going to the house, you are going to crossing the habitation. So obviously you are doing that. So that is what the Saubhagya program is there. Metering, he rightly pointed out that prepaid metering and all, because not because of that meter alone, it's the transaction cost of reading the meter and the billing and the collection is quite high. So if you want to improve upon the transaction cost, make it more efficient, you have to take the advantage of technology like a smart meter or the prepaid meters. And but the one thing that I would like, I have been managing the utility in past. I can guarantee that it's not the rural community and the poor people who make you bleed from the, make the DISCOM bleed. Their consumption level is so low that it is not going to affect otherwise. That is not to argue that they should not be metered. Our regulation is that no connection should be released without meter. It's a question of improving your machinery, that you can bill in time and you can collect in time. Otherwise, if you bill delayed, the total amount of bill becomes difficult for the common consumer to pay it.
And it becomes a burden.
It becomes a burden. So, therefore, this prepaid meter or the smart meter in that direction would be a very, very good, viable technological intervention.
Okay. Subhomoy, let's look at the bigger picture now. Electrification, what kind of an impact, what effects does it have on the economy, on education and other aspects?
First thing, even more than roads, electrification is extremely gender positive. I mean, this is probably one of the best things that a government can do in a country where gender ratios are, have a lot to be answered for. That's something that comes along very well. So that actually can be said as a major step to help women across the country. The second part is, when you have an electrification of this level across the country, then just as it has happened with gas, LPG supply, roads, the old models of delivery by all the public sector utilities have to be abrogated, scrapped. I would suggest now, it's impossible for the way the DISCOMs are right now structured to be able to supply consistently at a quality electricity to the remotest villages. They simply don't have the wherewithal, whether it's technology, whether the manpower, everything. So it'll have to be changed. And I think that is a very big challenge. Just as we are considering to do something with the railways, because the way it's expanded. Similarly for LPG, so what is now going to be the challenge for the country? And in fact, it's not a challenge. I think it's a great investment opportunity for setting up new corporations, for setting up new entities that can actually take up the challenge of managing the way we did it for telecom. We can do it, and we can think about, we can have, I think the old picture of private versus public sector, that's gone now, because everybody now has electricity connection. So I think that fight is over. We should now open the field for more robust investment by everybody into the utilities that the government has already set up and installed there on the field. And that, I think, is a very huge opportunity that is crying out. In fact, quite a few of the initiatives that this government has taken, it's of course been built on what's happened in the past too, but these now require a very robust thinking of the back end.
Right.
And that, I think, is the next step that should be taken on, and as an opportunity that should be harnessed.
All right. Mr. Verma, you started speaking about challenges in the first part of your answer, in the beginning of the program. What do you see as the biggest challenges going forward?
In household electrification?
In household electrification and generally electrification on the whole.
No, once, say, large scale activity throughout the country is going on, and this is a very technical kind of activity, therefore manpower, skilled manpower is one issue. Availability of good quality material at all the time is another issue. And sometimes in a remote area, snowbound area and all, even the area which are infested with the flood and all, the limited period working season is also something which we have to take care of. We are trying our best to take care of these things. Skill Development Ministry has come to our collaborations, and now we are developing some skill development centers in the states also, where specifically for the lineman training or say skilled manpower which will help in village electrification, household electrification are being trained. Similarly, we have been talking to all the manufacturers how to make it more and more available, the material, and so we have given them full idea that we will need this many material and all those things. Quality, we have been very emphatic that below a quality we cannot go. So we have prescribed a specific certain minimum specification below which nobody should buy.
Sure.
I think the industry is also quite responding well, I'm finding. And
everything seems to be in place at the moment.
See, when you really mean and try to succeed, and the whole world, the whole universe conspires to help you, kind of situation. See, this is a nobler job. I mean, this is what our brothers have been denied. Our brothers and sisters have been denied for long. So they must get it. We must try to do it by all means.
Sure. Mr. Razdan, like Mr. Verma has just pointed out, this is something that every subsequent government has tried to do in the past, but yet they have not been able to be successful. Why is that so, do you think?
It's an uphill journey. You can't, you see, after all, governments come with a certain time frame. And secondly, as I said, it also depends on the state where you are to execute that program. There are state where I served was the first state which declared 100% electrification 3 decades back. But there are still some households which are yet to be electrified. it's an uphill journey, and I think one of the major landmarks, milestones has been achieved. We have got to go forward. We've got to.
What should our next that having been said, what should our next milestone be?
Certainly is quality of power and making it a thorough economic activity. It gives you an opportunity, maybe again, from moving away from the present DISCOM method of handling the situation into maybe subcontracting at lower level to well-qualified people looking for franchisees in those villages, and giving an opportunity to the youth to maintain also and skill development, as Mr. Verma has said, because the linesmen, the old skills are not going to work in the new technologies, particularly if you're going to moving into smart grids, the new renewable technologies which are going to be there. I still feel in the remote areas, you cannot provide electricity lines maybe to all the remote areas. And then again to collection of the dues, just like you see telecom industry we've been talking about,
right,
has given an opportunity for a vast employment, but on a completely different model from where MTNL was operating for decades. So we have to do a management transition, and I think it has to be totally declared as an economic activity. The government can only take the infrastructure to that point,
right,
but beyond that, for daily use, it can only be sustainable.
Sure.
If it's a sustainable economic activity.
Sure. Subhomoy, a quick closing comment from you, as far as how this achievement is going to help the India growth story.
Well, one, it certainly shows that we can do. A big question mark about the Indian growth story has always been that there are lots more promises made than things achieved. Luckily, and I wouldn't say luckily, dedicated officers like Mr. Verma are basically ensuring that, many of the things are getting done. That is a very, very plausible thing. Rating agencies and others, they would factor in, they would write in that yes, it's been done. Industry across the world, investors across the world look at that. So that, I think, it would be something that would be really looked at, that yes, if India sets a target, it can and it does tend to achieve it, and as Mr. Verma pointed out, within time. So that I think is something that's worth saying. After GST, that this is quite a bit of a good tick mark. Okay. Caveats notwithstanding.
Sure. All right.
One small point just to rejoin what both of the other speakers are telling you. You rightly pointed out, one is commitment. See, the kind of fund which is available today for this has never been in the history of the country. This year in 2018-19, my budget is 22,000 crore for rural electrification. I mean, this kind of fund availability has never been made. There is, resource is always scarce in our country. Still, prioritizing the sector is one aspect which we cannot ignore here.
Sure.
And the second point he rightly pointed out, we have to change our way of doing the things to be more efficient and more relevant in the given condition. So, franchisee, as he rightly pointed out, is one thing. Some kind of outsourcing franchisee which is suitable to a rural setup, economic viability in a smaller scale of operation, because the consumption is not going to be as high as in Delhi per capita.
Sure.
So there's two things, and we are promoting this kind of distribution franchisee and things like that to come.
All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective. For us, what's coming out of the discussion, of course, is that it is indeed a great achievement, and it's going to have a multiplier effect, and it sends out a great signal to the world too that we have been able to achieve a target. That's it from me. See you again next time.